At Collibra, we believe that a shared understanding of data
brings people and ideas together.
We believe data connects and empowers us all.
Collibra, united by data.
Okay, welcome to a great talk by Eric Gerstner from Collibra. A little background on Eric. He's been in the financial services industry. He's done a lot of work in data quality, but I loved where it said he's going to check his ego at the door. So I'm going to be watching Eric and share real-world examples of mistakes made and lessons learned. And that's going to be interesting for all of us. So please welcome Eric into the session title 9-2, Data Quality and Observability, Most Embarrassing Data Moments.
Thank you, appreciate that. Hi everyone, I'm excited to be here today. So just if I think about what these sessions offer, and I think about the people who are here, they do a really good job with the bottom line up front. You've probably had some really good storytellers, but I'm remarked. I think about where I've been in my own journey for data governance and data quality. We think about something like gravity, right? So gravity started with an apple landing on someone's head. There was head injury, right? And it's that pain of the apple that caused someone to think about it and think about what gravity then is for us, right? So this idea of physics, a law emerged and it was gravity. So I thought about what would be an effective presentation, an effective way to tell stories. What I hope to accomplish with you today is talk about my most embarrassing data moments, my pain. I want to share that pain with you. And the reason why is because it all kind of comes together in a model that we've built that we decide represents the architectural stack for data quality and really in the scheme of data governance. So Eric Gerstner, everyone, really nice to see you. Before coming to Collibra, I was in the financial services industry. I was a chief product owner at a secondary mortgage market institution, a government-sponsored entity. Before that, I was a product owner. I was head of data quality products at another major financial institution. And then I spent a couple of years as a consultant doing a lot of the data governance and data analytics roles that you either manage or do yourselves. So these are my stories. These are my experiences. I hope to share with you the pain that I had in hopes that we can revel in the insight that follows. I will say I'm a big fan of, next slide, please.
The remote's right there.
Oh, great. Sorry. I was excited. Oh, you're fine. Here we go. So I will say I'm partial to question and answer type sessions. I'm a big fan of that. That always helps because it drives what people really want to talk about. This canned talk, if you will, this ability for me to just go into a rabbit hole can go on, and it can go on the entire time. But I would encourage, if at any point in time someone has a question, just raise your hand and let's address it. If not, we'll hit them at the end. Feel free to put them in the app. Just to kind of talk about the slide, though, and the format. Up in the left-hand corner, there's going to be like a theme, right? An idea, something that I've kind of drawn out. That's then followed by a question, right? You know, this idea of, okay, there's this theme of the golden rule, right? But then really it's, how do you want to be treated? Treat people like that. So then there's the question. And then lastly, we do have my anecdote or my story of something where I've experienced this pain. So we talk about good model, bad data. That's kind of the theme of this first view. Now, model is a strong term. We think about our industry. We think about data governance and what model means to us. I've heard it presented a lot of different ways. You might think of things like raw, conformed, non-conformed, analytic layers. The stack can go 4 and 5 layers deep. The one that I like, the one that to me speaks to both business and technology, is this idea of 3 layers. You have raw data as it exists, which is then processed or refined into information. That information is then assessed or analyzed to produce analytic insight. So my model, and the one that I hope, the paradigm that we can talk through today, is data to information, information to insight. We think about what that means, though, right? Who is using this insight? So we work at many organizations. We have strategic leaders. You yourselves are possibly strategic leaders. We've elected these people. The board's appointed them. We've hired them. They've vetted. We trust in their decision making. We trust in this model that a person can look at analytic insight and make a good decision. And let's take it beyond the human. Let's make it automated, a payments methodology, a payments system. This idea that if we've reached that level of insight that a machine needs to make a decision, it'll make a decision and it'll make the right decision. But that model is all dependent upon good data, or in my case, complete data. The story that I tell is about incomplete data. Bad data, no matter how good your model is, no matter how well put together you have it, bad data will lead to bad results if the model is bad, especially in a vein of automation, especially with a CEO who's extremely busy looking at a BI dashboard, making a judgment call on where to allocate funds. And in my particular instance, this is what happened. So I was at an organization, I was a product owner for data quality products. I was paired up with a marketing and analytics team. We were working on their data quality throughout this quarter. We had just started their journey for data quality products. And it was in this journey that we discovered that for the last quarter, they had not been receiving data. So they were purchasing data, proprietary data was coming into the organization. They were getting it incomplete and some days not at all. Now, one thing I do like to kind of hit on here is what the cost of this execution was. This was a seven-figure error. Seven-figure and erroneous marketing spend because they were based on bad marketing data. Now, that's painful, right? And I think about my experience. We're at the steering committee. The managing director is obviously very upset about this. And she looks at us and she's like, why wasn't someone just checking the data? Why wasn't someone just looking at the data to make sure that it's there? And I think about that. I think about the flippancy of it and really the flippancy of my reply that I wanted to be like, well, what does that look like? What does it look like to look in a database every day and make sure that your data is present? How are you trending it? How is your brain doing that, right? So the next slide then, kind of running with that, is just we talk about lessons learned. I won't harp on these slides too much. I think there's really a couple of themes there. And throughout this presentation, I hope to hit on two really big themes. The first one is automation. So we just talked about it. What does manually checking for data completeness look like? It's painful, but there is a way to automate it, and I believe that, and I've seen that. So my underlying theme of this presentation and telling these stories, in addition to talking about what is a good data quality stack, is going to be focusing on this idea of automation. And then the second theme then is disparate sources of data. I'm hearing this come up more and more. So I was a consultant, and we used to draw the current state architecture, target state architecture. We used to sell against disparate sources of data. You don't want these multiple data sources. You need to get it all centralized. Everything needs to be in the same place. That's how we were solving problems 10 years ago. That's how we were presenting it. I think in my experience with the industry and what I hope to share with you, and I hope it resonates, is I've kind of seen three trends that buck that say maybe perhaps disparate sources of data are endemic to our organization. This first one is proprietary data. We were one of the world's biggest banks. We had a lot to say, right? I mean, we're talking about a seven-figure mistake over marketing data. Clearly, we're spending a lot of money here. We couldn't control the format of that data coming in. The data was coming in, not to get too technical, but the data was coming in an XML type that had to be converted. It's where you hear things like ETL. So we were having to manipulate data coming in because it was not in a format we desired. We couldn't control it. So I would assert that this is one of the three examples I will give that says that disparate sources of data are endemic. So to kind of recap, right, we have this idea of wanting to be able to work with complete data, identifying complete data against multiple sources, managing a way that looks like automation, and then doing it in a way that can manage proprietary sources of data. So you have your good data, or really your complete data. What about bad metadata? Now that's another loaded term, so hopefully we can dig into it just a little bit. It's kind of like how model was, as I see it, data to information, information to insight. Again, some communities say data to information, information to intelligence. Metadata is a loaded term. The one that I hear the most often used for metadata is this idea that it's data about data. So data about data. I think that's good. I think that's accurate. But I do want to challenge it slightly in this model we just talked about and maybe use an example. So we have an Excel spreadsheet. You have your Excel, you're looking at your Excel. This is like the old-fashioned how we relate things for data governance. You have that top column and it's date, the letters D-A-T-E. You look at this column and you see what looks to be like month, month, day, day, year, year. Really, it's 6 numbers separated by a backslash. Now, your brain looked at something, it profiled it, and it said, you know what, this is a time series-based set of data. That's profiling. But profiling is producing metadata. So I would say kind of in this model of data to information, information insight, I would assert that metadata is really information about your data. It's not just data about data. It has to undergo some process to really be usable. And people who can look at information and then interpret from it are really looking at metadata as it is as information and not just data. But then how do I profile our data consistently? So as a consultant, I was embedded in a lineage team. It was good, right? But it was about 7 years ago, before there was all these tools, all this pitch to help you automate lineage, to make lineage better, tools to use lineage. We used Excel. And this workbook had gotten to be like, I don't know, it was like 65 sheets. Now, it was conclusive. So if someone had a lineage question, they could actually go into the Excel and find all their answers because this platform was being built. But ultimately, our chief architect comes to this consultant group and he says, guys, this is too much. We need like a data dictionary. We need a summary. We need something that's a little bit more basic. So we bid on the work and we said, yeah, we're happy to do this. We're happy to help consolidate our lineage into what would be a data dictionary. But I had an idea, right? I was a young, hungry associate consultant. A senior was the title, and I wanted to do this in an automated fashion. So we go back to that theme of automation. What can we do to automate lineage? So this was a brand new platform. It was pretty seamless. It was one schema, so it should be easy to automate. So I pointed to that, and that's how we bid. We bid on this idea that we were going to be able to automate our metadata, automate this data dictionary. And we plugged it into a tool, and the tool did really, really good. It covered about 80% of it, and that's kind of like the gap, right? We didn't know that it only covered 80% of it. The way we tested it, we looked at the results, we compared it to the inputs, we said we're good. We didn't look at the inputs to compare them to the outputs, and as a result of that, we failed to observe unstructured data. So this organization, right, this organization was processing everything in an extensible markup language, XML. It was a Kafka-built structure. It was very well advanced, but there was this underlying pipe of CSV data, and we missed it. So there's the embarrassment of missing it. There's also the fact that you're a consultant trying to manage your margins, and now we had to put more work to it, and we hit our billing. So this wasn't as expensive as the 7-figure mistake. We're talking about something that was near 6 figures effectively. But really, it was just me spending a lot of time on the weekend going in and manually fixing this because this was now my problem to fix. So for me, it was very personally painful. But I kind of take away from this experience, and I think about how consistent profiling is essential for consistent results. So profiling is a foundation for anyone who has worked a lot with data quality from which you might build your data quality. And we'll talk about that in other slides. But it's a process of turning data about data into metadata, right? Information about data. And there is ways for automation. So going back to this theme, in spite of the fact that we only automated 80% of the process, we did realize that you can automate your profiling. You can do things to subjectively say what a schema is, even if it's unstructured, and we've kind of gotten to that point. But I think the key theme here as well, and this goes back to disparate data sources, is private data. We talked about how disparate data sources may be endemic to your organization, to your ecosystem. We talked about how proprietary data that's bought in, can be brought in, and you can't control the formatting. Now, these were, again, very big organizations. These were government-sponsored entity banks. But they had large enough customers who said, we don't want our data shared. We want our data separate. We want our data private. And the only way that we could prove that to an auditor was to just put it in a different format. It was the easiest way to show that it was separate. We, again, not to be technical, everything's going to sit in XML. We're going to put this private layer then in CSV. So you think about what that can mean for you and your organization. If not a really big customer, maybe perhaps a government mandate. If you're in the state of California and you're trying to prove that you're adhering to the California Consumer Privacy Act, you might find yourself having to put your data in a different store, having to separate it beyond a schema, beyond a database, maybe even then, in this case, a different type of technology. So to me, again, disparate sources of data are endemic to the organization. I think about ways that we can automate profiling, but there is ultimately this idea that profiling should be consistent regardless of what data type you're working with. So you have your good metadata. You've built your metadata for your platform. You've figured out how to master your profiling. Then there's this idea of bad rule logic. Now I say rule logic. Why rule logic? Why not just rule? So we think about our industry, and I do applaud everyone in here because this is one of the most, this will go down as just a difficult industry, right? I think about my cousin, and this is the closest anecdote or way that I can relate to this industry. She's a librarian. She's a librarian for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And she was asking me what I do for a living. And I was trying to explain it to her, and she said, you're a librarian. It's like, how so? And she's like, look, you have your governance, right? You have this idea of how things would be organized. 40 years ago, it was the Dewey Decimal System. Now we use computers. But ultimately, you're organizing information for people to access. And I was like, wow, Peggy, you're right. Like, that's true. And she said, but there is one catch. I mean, she worked at an organization where some of the people who authored these books would come in and check these books out. And if you think about that, right, we know the tradecraft of data governance. We're familiar with the data. My cousin reads a lot of books. A librarian probably could look at a book and say, yeah, that's fantasy, that's fiction, that fits within this data governance scape. But we're at a university. If an MIT professor who wrote that book comes in, the originator of that data is probably going to know the data better than you. So if you think about this idea then of creating data quality and rule logics, you're also going to have to deal with this idea that you might not necessarily know where to begin because you might not know the data. And so you work with the business. But then ironically enough, the business might not know what could go wrong with data. And this is what happened to me. What rules should I write? So back when I initially got started in this industry, I was a finance guy, the MBA, the works, and I was with a data and analytics practice, but I was being pitched as a business analyst. And I got embedded with a derivatives team. So this team was writing rules against mortgage data that was coming in, structured finance data. And they said, hey, just write a bunch of rules. Just write us some rules to check what might go wrong with this data coming into this organization. And I was paired up with another guy who's a full-time employee. He was a chartered financial analyst. So a CFA and an MBA writing rules. And we thought we were the cat's pajamas, right? We thought we were going to do really well with this. We wrote ourselves like 100 rules in this first sprint, like thinking in like an agile context. So in 3 weeks, we wrote 100 rules. The next 3 weeks, those rules are codified. And we'll get into what that means in the next slide. But these rules are translated into a data syntax that a machine could read. And then the next sprint, it was regression tested. So 9 weeks, multiple teams involved, 100 rules. And when you know it, not a single rule failed in the regression testing. Not a single rule. 100 rules, not a single one of them failed. Easily $50,000 to $60,000 worth of consultant spend, nothing. Why? Well, this data was coming from banks. And banks had armies of bond administrators doing these checks, checking to make sure that the data was right with regards to specific business nuance. So it didn't mean the data wasn't failing, it was just failing in ways we didn't predict. So I'll give an example. Mortgage term, right? Mortgage term typically starts at 360 months, so 30-year mortgage times 12, 360 months. We wrote a rule that says, mortgage term needs to go down. And if it doesn't go down, there needs to be a check for a delay, right? So we're doing like a cross-column compare. We're writing this rule. We think it's great. But there's this thing in technology called a race condition. Too much data comes in, the system process starts to break down, the data doesn't get entered correctly, and then a certain rule enforces something. So mortgage term went down, it just went from 360 to 0. And if you think about what that means that it should have been paid off, and the paid off block should have been checked. But that was not a rule we thought to write, because we didn't even know where to begin. We didn't know where to write our rules. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge the business is going to have. And this kind of goes back to this idea of metadata being the basis for rule writing. But human rule writing is error prone. Further, when people leave, we could have written all these rules, and we started to get better at writing rules. But when we wrote these rules, if we left, who was going to keep them up to date? Who was going to maintain them? Who was going to know what they meant? I think the key theme there, though, is there's got to be a way to automate this. There's got to be a way to build a baseline level of rules. If we know we're going to be building rules off of metadata, if we know we're going to be building rules off of profiling, because that's where we were starting, what can we do to look at today's profiling and compare it to yesterday's profiling? Look at what's trending. Look at what might be different. And that's kind of, we'll get into that, but that's kind of then this idea of what becomes your minimum viable data quality trust. So you have good rule logic. You have your rule logic. It's good. You've kind of figured out where you want to go. Maybe you've started with profiling. Maybe you've figured out your metadata. I mean, that's what we started doing. We would actually look at what the data could be. We were reacting, unfortunately. We were not proactive. But then there's this idea of scale. We talked about rule syntax, rule scale. What does that mean? So we have different people from different audiences, from different parts of the data world here. But ultimately, you are writing a rule, and I talked about it, a business rule, mortgage term goes down. But what does that look like? How do we actually check that? And that's then this idea of converting what is logic into some syntax. Now, most of the industry tends to use SQL, structured query language. There are other things out there. There are actually tools out there, tools that help business users put rule logic into some form of rule syntax. But you have to start to be careful. You have to think about how you're managing your rules. And where I've seen this impact is, unfortunately, this idea of proprietary SQL. So you write your rules. Maybe you're in the business. You're like me. You're just becoming more and more technical. You even learn some SQL. But someone presents to you a tool to help you write your rules. You write those rules, and they're stored in a syntax that doesn't always work. That's what happened here. So I'm now a data quality product owner again. I'm working with a team, and this team is my customer because they are rule writers. So I facilitate the products for data quality. They're the customers. They use them to write rules. They had a legacy product in place. They were a very advanced rule writing team. They had 30,000 rules written, 30,000 rules. They were in that structured query language, that SQL that we talked about, but it was proprietary SQL. It was the vendor SQL. So when they decided they wanted to move, when we were moving as an organization to a different data store technology, we go to the vendor and we say, hey, are you going to support this new technology? And they say, no, not yet. It's on a 2-year horizon. We'll get to it. Again, one of the world's biggest banks being told no by a vendor because we want to be able to support a technology type, and these rules, this SQL, won't support it. 30,000 rules. 30,000 rules that are now legacy rules. We talk about a data migration, how difficult that is, actually moving data. Now we're thinking about having to manage the movement of metadata. So this SQL that we had, this proprietary SQL, they didn't even want to give it to us initially. They told us, no, it's encrypted. You don't get the SQL. We said, okay. So that was an argument with legal. But then when we got it, I got to tell you, it was so complicated. The SQL is so hard, you couldn't manage that transfer. Now, here's the other side of it. You've just had a contentious relationship with your vendor, right? I'm not an easy person to work with. I'll own that. I get some smiles from the back room on that comment. So I didn't exactly was nice to them, but now they know they have us. They have us by 30,000 rules, and we're talking about 7 figures worth of retaining legacy technology for no other reason than we don't know what to do. And every time we estimate the size with our technology partners, they're just quoting us enormous costs to migrate 30,000 rules. So I do believe this could be addressed. Franchise risk directly proportional to DQ rules. I believe in that, because if we were in a situation where we just had to move, we just had to do this migration, the technology is not there with us, we just lost our entire rule base. We just lost our foundation of data quality. This is further amplified by the fact that even those 30,000 rules, how many of them were really, really accurate, still relevant to today's technology? Migration is enduring in premier technology. This is the third example. We talked about disparate data sources. We talked about this idea of proprietary data, data you're bringing into the organization. Private data, data that sits under the organization, some separate pipe. You got to do something. You have to show the auditor that you care about this data and that it's treated privately. Premier technology is the third example. If If you took a bet 8 years ago on AWS, right? I was at a company, that was their thing. They joked about it. It was because Amazon for data, right? Like this was in 2014. It was a huge thing, right? And it paid off though. I mean, AWS was a good bet. But just because you made a bet on AWS, we'll say a decade ago, doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking at Snowflake today. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to consider things like Starburst and emerging technologies. So as you look at these new technologies and you look at this idea that data center migration is enduring, data migration is enduring, you want to be able to have rules and metadata that transcend. Otherwise, it's going to be a really painful process. Now, I do believe this can be solved. If you ask me what type of SQL makes this work, I speak to what they call ANSI compliant SQL, working with vendors to make sure that the SQL that they're writing or the rule language that they're writing works with all of their database technology. If you want to take it with you, can you take it with you? Making sure that they say, yes, you can. And then perhaps just maybe this idea that they'll even let you write the SQL in your own language. So if you're only in Oracle, if you're only in Microsoft Shop, and you want to write Microsoft SQL, this idea of being able to use it. So you've achieved scale, right? And just kind of recap, right? We've figured out how to make sure we kind of have that data completeness. We know this foundation of profiling the data and why it's important to data quality. We've thought about our rule logic, rules coming into the organization. How are we writing rules? This kind of working with business. We then think about what we can do, right, to make those rules scale. And now we're at a point of notification. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is the thing everyone sees. This is the problem everyone brings to their vendors. It's why technologies, and I'll look at our near peers like Jira, stand out because they have good workflows, right? I can go in, I can start a story, this person can mark the story, everyone can work in it. There's the workflow or notification is a key theme for enacting data quality. But why is it difficult? And I go back to this analogy of us being, data governance. It's such a difficult industry. I think about near peers. I think about people that we sometimes get related to. Sometimes we roll up underneath them. I've seen chief data officers roll up underneath a chief risk officer. If I was in the front office, if I'm in the business, if I'm the originator of the data, and someone calls me and they say, hey, we're from the risk office. There's an operational risk incident related to fraud. We'd like to talk with you about it. I'm going to take that call seriously. I'm going to pick up the phone and say, all right, what's going on here? I want to make sure it's not me, but that's because a fraud incident usually will result in termination. People will get fired over fraud. So if risk is investigating fraud and they call you up, you take it seriously. We oftentimes get related to technology. I didn't go into it in the last slide, but if you think about our near peers, technology, this idea of actually writing the SQL rule, actually building a data pipeline, we might be in those roles ourselves, people in this audience, but within the CTO, if someone called you and you're in the front office and says, hey, you know that email that's not working for you? We got you. Like, let's start talking about it. I've had an issue with my laptop now for about 6 weeks. If someone called on that cell phone and it was about that laptop, I might take the phone call and be like, 1 second, y'all, I need this new laptop, right? You've become so embedded with technology. There's so much stress around your ability to get work done day to day that if the CTO office calls you, you're picking up the phone. What about the data office? If you're in the front office and someone calls you up and says, hey, we got a data issue. Would you mind taking a look at it? I might send it to voicemail. I might not answer it. So an email might not do the trick. It might need to be more than a phone call. It might need to be a visit. And this is where this idea of notification really sets in. What are you doing to execute an easy workflow? In my particular case, I was at an organization now. I was a little bit more senior, so the chief product owners at the role I was at, if anyone's familiar with banking, it's a senior ED role. Some of them are MDs. There's a few of us. But the one for like the data side of the house came to me and said, hey, you know this technology really well. Can you help me work with one of our product owners on implementing it and rolling out? And I said, yeah, sure. And so I was talking to this person. She was a rule writer, but also a product owner for the rule writing technology. And she was trying to sell me on why her software was so good. And I just asked her a question. I said, so you have these results. You have this output, this rule result. There's a data quality issue. How are you notifying the business? She said, oh, we got you. It's an automatic email. We have a server send out an email to this distro with these people. I said, all right. So one of my mentors was a senior director in the business, actually in that business unit. And I called him up and I said, hey, Bill, how's it going? And we're chatting about something. I said, are you getting these emails? He's like, yeah, I see those emails, I guess. I don't know, I figured someone on my team was working on them. I said, Bill, this is like bad data quality issues. I mean, who's looking at this, right? So we look at the email, and when you know it, it was like to 15 people, 13 of the emails were dead, right? It was just Bill and another person that was on it. And he was hot, right? He's now nervous because we're talking, and again, to give a financial idea, this is close to 8 figures in risk exposure, right? Because you're looking at something that we knew about. There's clear train of us knowing about it. I mean, legal had to get involved. It ended up being a really big deal. And to be fair, it got addressed, and none of the customers were upset. We notified them. You're good. So we look at that risk exposure. We look at his experience. He's hot. He's upset. He's nervous. I can see him sweating on this call. And then he's finally like, okay, what do we do from here? And I think back to what that product owner told me. I said, well, you got to open up a ticket. He's like, are you kidding me? I got to open up a ticket? What's a ticket? What does that mean? I'm like, a ServiceNow ticket. He's like, where is that? He's like, is that this help page? Like, you're technology. Why aren't you just fixing this? If I replied all to this email and said, fix this, then you should fix this, right? Like, well, this team's data quality. I'm not even in charge of this pillar. I don't even know what to tell you, Bill, right? So I'm waffling. But he was hot. He was angry. And I think about that, right? I think about how do I respond to the issues and who owns them. Now, I talked about what makes our world difficult. I talked about some near peers. I mentioned the risk organization. And, well, since 2007, at least in financial services, everyone takes risk very seriously. I talked about technology and how they so well emerged and embedded themselves that they are taken seriously. What about HR? And, I love me some HR, enjoy an HR business partner, but the reality is most of your organization knows HR coming in or leaving the organization. They know you coming in because they're working with the recruiters, they're working with the compensation, they're working with the onboarding, and they know you leaving because they're working on their exit package. I say that because HR has data that they care about. They have metrics that they care about. Vacation time, right? Who here actually puts in their vacation? I see some hands raised. I love it. I love it because it's data the organization needs. It's data the CEO needs, right? So if I'm an HR, chief HR, right, or if I'm the head of an HR pillar, and I'm trying to get people to put in their vacation, to not just have a handshake agreement with their boss, this is where you get into a good workflow and good technology. Things like Workday, some of these tools that exist now, it's as easy as 2 and 3 clicks. And so when you make it that easy, there's less of an excuse. When you have the metrics to produce and say, hey, this person hasn't taken vacation in over a year, fraud alert, right? Some organizations force their front office to take vacation. We haven't seen this person take vacation. Oh no, I gotta go in and actually account for the days I missed. So a workflow with the simplicity and clicks is my technology attempt to solve this notification challenge, to solve this problem. And I stand by that because I'm seeing it work, at least with HR. I meet a lot of people who are new to companies. And they're like, yeah, it's no big deal, 3 clicks, right? I'll just go and I'll put my vacation in. I'm guilty of it, right? I took a day off. I forgot to put it in Workday. But because it's so easy, in theory, it's about as easy as you're going to get with today's technology. I don't really have an excuse. So when you think about building your data quality and implementing it, you can, if you don't discover anything's wrong, you can have data quality trust. But once things are wrong, you need a good workflow, you need good notifications to achieve that. So here we are. After all those stories, painful moments, I'm sweating thinking about the financial loss and the times that I don't know, if it had got put on me, maybe I'd have lost my job for some of these. I mean, these were expensive mistakes. This is our stack. I don't like that it says CDOIQ, to be honest with you. I know they showed that video, but I would be pitching this stack regardless of the technology. I really stand by that left side of the screen. When you think about your data quality program and what you're trying to build and achieve, you want to integrate across multiple data sources. You can't just get tied to one data source. I hate to say cloud agnostic, DB agnostic, technology agnostic, but it needs to be able to integrate. You want to profile your data consistently. So whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's Collibra database, whether it's an Oracle highly structured database, your profiling and your output should be consistent to get you that good metadata, from which you're then able to build good rule logic. Now there's a nuance here, automatically detecting change. I believe that. That's an industry trend that's new. Not a lot of technologies can do this. But what can I do with your profiling of your data to tell you what might be wrong? And if you have those 3 layers, if those layers are running and nothing's popping up, perhaps then you could give a passing data quality score. You can achieve what we call minimum viable data quality trust. But then you will have to write rules, right? Business may get involved, something will break. When you write those rules, though, you want scale, you want standardization. There are softwares now that can help you do what's called rule discovery. What can I do to go into a table, know that I have 100 rules already in place, and discover where those rules might be applicable? And then lastly, workflow. When something does go wrong, it needs to be seamless. It needs to be like Workday so that there's no excuse. So my buddy Bill can't just look at me and be like, this is a ridiculous process, right? I say, Bill, look, you had a notification. You had multiple notifications. And it wasn't just email. It's in the site that we make you go to day in to test. So that's the stack. I typically get through this with about 15 minutes left. There's no questions during. Does anyone have any questions about, yeah, go ahead. Or how does this go, Robert? Do I take from the audience or the phone?
Either walk or we could bring it over to you. Hang on. Maybe we'll just carry it around. That might be a little easier. All right. Coming over. Yeah. No, this is good. This is good. Go right ahead.
Thanks for, very interesting insights. Just coming back to the 30,000 rules, lessons learned, right?
Yeah, right.
So it looks like you were really right, by that situation. So would you agree that maybe a lesson learned would be that you should have documented the rules in like a human language kind of
Absolutely.
Word document?
Absolutely.
And then if the supplier wouldn't want to help you migrate, at least you could restore the rules and rewrite them with a much less than 7 figures.
Yeah.
Would that be a lesson as well?
Oh, absolutely, right? So that is, to your point, the nature of data governance, right? And it's interesting because it's almost like Inception. Here we are, a dream within a dream, so I apologize if this gets complex. But you nailed it. Even the data governance of rule writing should exist. I'm at an organization that champions data governance, right? We have to drink our own champagne. We have data governance offerings. We have a data dictionary that's in Excel for this software. What are we doing? We're putting it into the technology. So to your point, when you write a rule, you should have the business context. You should have the logic, right? You think about Excel. If you don't make everything just an if statement, you might have in the next column over, that's what this actual rule is. This rule is checking loan term. And you see the if statement. Now, a lot of us have probably done our work in Excel so we can appreciate what an if statement might be, but you're absolutely right. That is a huge takeaway there and a very good point. Thank you, sir.
Questions? There you go. And by the way, if you have a question, you could always go up and queue up at the mic, although I've got that one.
Thank you for
And for asking a question, you get another drink ticket. Yeah.
It's on.
It's on. Thank you. So piggybacking up on the 30,000 rule comment.
Sorry about that.
We work on data management consistently because data, if not managed, becomes stale.
Right.
Rules are also data.
That's right. How do you keep your rules from getting stale?
And have you come across a rubric to say, this scale of an organization, this level of complexity, you should have at least these many rules?
So it's,
or
yes.
this much is too much.
Yes. So too many rules is a problem. And, again, this touches a little bit, there's 2 themes here. And I'm really adamant about keeping this agnostic to certain technologies. I'm partial to ours. But you brought up 2 themes. First and foremost, how many rules is enough rules? And that's a tough question to answer. What's nice about an automated approach is whether it's 5 or 15, and those rules are being generated per column, you know what you have. And I would fashion that some of y'all in this organization or in your organizations might have rule writing teams What I say then is your pivoting of resources, right? We're not just about reduction of headcount. We're about pivoting of resources, right? The farmers didn't just go out of work. Industrial revolution led to the factory. It's difficult to build a PowerPoint slide, right? But if someone hands you a PowerPoint slide, it's a lot easier to edit it. So if I'm generating rules for you, you're right. It might be a lot of rules, but having that DQ rule writing team then use the vetting process to say, are these good rules or are they bad rules? That's how I manage the human part of it. Now, to your point on how many rules are a good number, I'll be honest with you. It's all about what you're trying to sell to your most senior leaders and to your steering committee. So imagine, for example, if you had no rules and you had a software that could automate rules, and you show up to your next steering committee after 3 months and you say, hey, look, we just generated 1,200 new rules. Now we're vetting them, right? So to your point, what I find is it's less about achieving a number of rules and more about showing the velocity on the way or the acceleration. So case in point, I said it was 100 rules. Was that a right amount of rules that I had written? But it was a lot, and it was done in 3 weeks. So to your point, it's a hard answer to give because I don't know if there's a set number. I mean, you could think about it, like if your organization has a really tightly wound schema, they might not need as many rules. But it's a really good question. I think it's just more about the number of rules you generate in a period of time. And if it's an aha number for people, if there's any history, case in point, you said 30,000 rules. I know a software, I'm partial to it. I know a software that when they looked at that 30,000 rules, we automated 50% of it. So as to say, right, hey, we just generated you 15,000 rules in a 6-month period of doing a massive scan. That's half of what you had in your database. So to your point, it's tough. It's tough to give that number. I mean, if you ask me to ballpark, I'm 5 to 6 rules per column, right? Like you could do the null check, you could do the cardinality check. If it's a value min or max, those are the things you could work with. So we'll talk about that more. I have to noodle on that. What would be a good number? But 5 is the number that feels right now.
Okay, got a question over here.
So I guess the question comes around, you mentioned about the business process owners with the business rule writers, but a lot of times it's back to the process. So 30,000, I had a similar experience, and we documented all the and if or buts, never but maybes.
Yeah, right.
And it's because some business process owner tried to document every exception and try to build something in there. And what we found is it wasn't the data, but we needed to go back and change the business process to eliminate some of those things because they were trying to get everything in there. So how do you get that, when identified, it's really a process issue, not a technology issue, not a data quality, because then there's that part with the user interface where they try to put so many data checks that the person ends up just giving up because they can't get through the screen.
Absolutely. So what you just described there is a fundamental challenge of data quality, which is when do you apply it, right? So you're in the business of where do you execute data quality. The general theme tends to be capture and fix as early as possible. But I like your point because I also have seen where that can be, for lack of a better word, a touch unrealistic, right? If you've made something wound so tightly, so enforcing of entering all this metadata, so many drop downs. I mean, employee surveys, right? I don't even understand the 1 to 5 rating. Just was I satisfied with this Uber ride, yes or no, right? Binary. But we do these things where we offer all these checks, and we scale it 1 to 5. And if you think about from a data quality perspective, if you're a salesperson and you're working in their tool is Salesforce or HR and Workday, and you make them do all these checks, and then, oh, by the way, you want to validate the commit, so now you pop up a screen, is this all right, and you press OK. They stop being data creators, and they avoid the process. Now, how do you solve for that? One of the things that I would say where we would start data quality to initially scan and discover is actually as far left as possible. Thinking about your architecture slides, in that centralized data store, in that data lake, in that deepest, farthest zone, that's where we would start and even apply technologies like this. And our reason for that is if you discover an issue there, that's what the analysts are using. Now you trace it back with lineage, you trace it up to the point of origin, and you try to address it at point of origin, but you're right, some things won't get addressed at point of origin. So then could we address it at a bronze zone? If you see when people now do their architecture slides, they show data moving from a point of origin to like a bronze zone, a silver zone, a gold zone. So as much as processing allows, you move it closer to the point of origin, because if you fix it there, in theory, it's fixed downstream. But even then, hops in your organization is going to have issues. That's why I always say start with as much data quality as you can in that lake, in that final point of rest, with an understanding that when you discover an issue, you're going to need things like lineage to trace it. You're going to try to fix it at source, but you can only do it as much as people, process, and technology allows. Because you mentioned that, and I really like that point. Even technology limitations. If we had a whole bunch of rules, I once wrote rules and it was a software called Schematron. It was slowing down the processing of the XML data coming in. People say, oh, we'll just make the schema tighter, but then it becomes too tight, and then some bit of legacy data breaks the machine. So yeah, whether it's technology, people, or process, you try to move it right, but you accept that sometimes it's going to have to sit closer left. It's a good question, thank you.
Good. Did you have a question? You answered it. Okay. Yours?
Thank you so much for your presentation. Really, really interesting. You've touched, my question's around the quantifiable value of data quality. You touched around this point a little bit around the impact that it can make, but often data quality is seen as quite intangible, and so it doesn't get the investment it deserves. I wonder, how do you describe the quantifiable impact of high data quality?
Sure, and we'll embrace the fact that at the end of the day, right now, data governance, right? We have our chief data and analytics officers, and analytics are doing a really good job of being revenue drivers. They're really good, right? Data science, they're good at telling a story with data, so they're showing themselves to be the revenue drivers. We are oftentimes seen as a cost function. I like your point, though. That was why I hit the monetary value. So I've obviously practiced this. I sent it around my organization, and a buddy of mine, the CEO of data quality, so he's the head of our business unit for data quality, he's like, Eric, I like it, but how much did all this cost? He's like, he worked with me at one of these banks when he was selling the software there, and he was like, I remember that one. He's like, that was like 6.5 million. I was like, yeah. So what we do, and what I saw was effective, is if you've built a data quality program, when you have a true result, a true break, if you can show what that would have cost to have not been detected, right now, that's what I find is the best metric. That's what, because we're in a cost function, but our chief data officer could take that, could present that to the board. Hey, our data quality program identified 27 anomalies that would have hit this part of the business. Each one of those could have effectively resulted in like a $1.2 million fine, right? This is now we're showing numbers of what we're saving, but you're right. I feel like now I'm more in the front office than I've ever been. I was operations. I was always back office operations at a bank. I get asked a lot less questions in the front office. Like I get a lot less time checks. To your point, if we could prove this to be a revenue driver, and I think you can, I haven't figured that one out yet myself. So it's a really great question. It's a tricky one. Yeah, if I do, I'll send you an email or we'll write about it, because that's a really good question.
If there are no other questions in here, we've got some online. Any other questions in here? Okay. First online question with the most votes. What applications of AI algorithms do you see applied to improve data quality? I believe what they're asking is what tools, like, for example, automated discovery, automated profiling, automated rule generation, what tools do you see emerging in that AI space for machine learning?
Absolutely. So if you asked me specifically for this software, if that's the question of where this is coming from, it's about 18 algorithms in the software that we're using. So this software for Collibra does automate data quality. Now, you mentioned something there. When you think about any aspect of data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, there's a lot of debate. Here we have a person leave Google because they're convinced an artificial intelligence is sentient, but people deny it. So I find my big thing is to talk about what are we doing to automate. So that gets into more classical algorithms, right? Bell curve analysis. There's something called Levenshtein distance. So here's a good example. We deal with a lot of duplicates in data. But if you were to write that rule and you just want to do an equal check, I want to check that these two rows are equal, you might not find near duplicates, William Gates versus Bill Gates. But really there is some correlation between those rows, and that's a good algorithm for that is called Levenshtein distance. And that's something that I know we use and I know other tools use. But that's this idea of, okay, I want a fuzzy match. I want to be able to look for fuzzy matching between two rows to see if we have multiple users registered. That's what I would say to that.
Okay. And if there are no questions here, one more question. What is the recommended approach to integrate data quality and validation tests with the data ops lifecycle?
I'm calling that data observability. So we're seeing this with Gartner. There's a lot on data quality, and then there's term data observability. We talk about the two industries. Actually, that was my last job. I was the head of the tool chain. So less so data governance technologies, more so things like Jira, Istio Service Mesh, and I got to see how DevOps played. When you think about data ops is a group of individuals who more than likely sit under a head of data who sits in technology. They are building those pipelines. They're building those stacks. So when you think about how they use data quality, it might be a little different than a self-service data quality to a business user. The business user needs the UI, the same way we need the Excel spreadsheet. But as anyone who's ever used Excel or knows their friends who are super Excel users, there's this whole underlying code, right? This VBA, this Visual Basic that someone could just write. Oh yeah, 4 seconds. So long story short, I would assert that whatever data quality technology you use, you want that user experience, that UI, that then also ties to maybe a RESTful API call or a series of robust command lines that the data observability people can also use. And that's bridging the two worlds of observability and data quality.
Eric, I think this was a great presentation. Let's give him a hand. Thank you very much. And we really enjoy here at MIT the interactivity and interaction between peers. Feel free to reach out to Eric. He'll be out in his booth. And we've all got our questions for him.
If I might, just real quick, if you have a question, hit me on the WOVA. I will happily answer it when time allows, so maybe this evening. We do have a booth, right? So I was told to say that, so I now said it. But really, if anyone just has a question, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. If you're doing something, I really think that the more we can collective thought on this, the better we'll all achieve outcomes for the entirety of, society. So, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.